I haven't been involved in any of the CPD this week. I apologise for that. I was telling everyone earlier I've been moving house, which has been fun in a pandemic with children off homeschooling as well. So I haven't been involved in any of them. So apologies if I repeat anything that has been said already, and apologies if I'm not completely on the ball today. But I will try my best. I have been asked to look at feedback today. I did look at feedback a little bit in my CPD last CPD week as part of assessment, but I was asked to look at it a little bit in a more focused way today, and we'll be looking at how we give feedback remotely. I recommend you close any other browsers that you might have open, because it does reduce the connection if you have more than one browser open, and also it helps the sound quality. Also, it reduces any distractions that you might have. And if you do lose connection, then just log out and come back in. I'll let you back in. Okay, sure, that's all been covered with you already this week, so I won't read that out. Most of the time I'll ask you to write in the chat bar, but I might have a little experiment with the rooms. Danny was just telling me about that, so we'll see how we get on. Okay, can you see that on the screen? Just nod to me, yeah. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at exploring strategies for giving appropriate feedback, to look at the role of formative and summative feedback, any barriers and challenges to providing feedback remotely, remote feedback methods, methods of giving constructive feedback, and gaining feedback from candidates. Okay, so what I'd like you to do, on the screen, there are 9 statements. And the first 7, I'd like you to rate them from a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being that you strongly disagree and 5 being that you agree with that statement. And then number 8 and 9 will just be a yes or a no response. If you could just write those down for me, I'll just give you 1 minute. Not, you don't have to obviously write the whole sentences, but your scale of 1 to 5, do you agree or disagree with those statements? And then 8 to 9, a yes or a no.
Did you want this in the chat box, Jenna?
Yeah, let's put it in the chat box. Let's do that. We'll do it as we look through each statement, though. We won't do it all in one now. Just write them down for now. If possible, could you either use the chat box or use the raise hand function just to let me know when you've finished? Okay, so just 30 more seconds. Okay, I think most people have finished. Okay, so let's have a look through these then. So number 1, feedback is vital to a candidate's progress. If you could use the chat bar, do you agree, strongly agree, or are you in the middle on that one? Okay. So it's like everybody thinks that's 5. That's good. That means we are all on the same page. Excellent. Oh, someone said a 4. Who said a 4? That. Okay. No worries. Welcome, Victoria. Okay, number 2, effective feedback is constructive and thought-provoking. So a scale of 1 to 5. So does effective feedback need to be constructive and thought-provoking? Okay. So again, 5s and 4s, that's good. Not a lot of conversation needed on those, I don't think. Okay, number 3, candidates are more concerned with their grade than reading the feedback. Okay, so let's have a little conversation about this one then. Matthew Vine, you said a 4 for that one, or 5? So you strongly agree that candidates aren't bothered about reading the feedback, they just want to know whether they passed or not, is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know if it's just the experience that I've had, but from a lot of the 16 teens, like a lot of the times in the level 3 sport I've done, they're like, is that a distinction ready? Is that distinction ready? Is that a merit, etc. And they'll go on just making sure they do that rather than like, obviously you do try and tell them to have a look at the feedback, but a lot of them just want to get that certificate, that grade, rather than sort of wanting to progress themselves. I think like with a lot of the other comments I've seen, a lot of people in there, I think the people that predominantly do adult learning, I think the older you get, the more you probably look at the feedback. But I don't know if it's just a personal experience or just something that just happens.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. Absolutely. So somebody who's put, so Prishka, you've put a 2 on that. So you disagree. So your experiences are different. Could you explain why you put a 2? Prishka, are you there? Or anybody else? Anybody else that's put something lower?
I put a 2.
Sorry, didn't realize I was muted. Sorry.
Sorry, we'll come back to you, Jeremy. Go on then, Prishka.
Okay, sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. I was speaking to myself. So I find my, I teach the adults, and they're usually interested in knowing, okay, they're very interested in passing, but when they don't pass, they want to know why they didn't pass. Sometimes they'll even argue about the criteria. So I find it's very important to make them understand why they haven't passed, why, and especially to address a point why they think they passed, but actually they haven't. So
Yeah.
I think for my
So
adults, I find they're
so-
both interested in the feedback.
Yeah, so they're looking for more detail. They want to know exactly what they need to do in order to improve. Yeah.
Yes, and it's especially when they haven't passed. When they've passed,
Yeah.
not so much, but when they haven't passed, yeah.
Okay. And what was you going to say, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think totally agree with what Prishka and Matthew have said. And I think in the context of wellbeing courses, for example, I think it's the feedback that is the most important thing, actually, because they may have, well, they will have wellbeing issues. It's, over and above just the grade, it's just maybe recognition for the fact that they can engage with other people without panic attacks, or they can work independently, or they can join a group discussion, or they can just, at the very least, sign up for a course and have the motivation and the confidence to do that. So I think the feedback for wellbeing courses is something that even each and every day, it's important just to keep them feeling confident and engaged and feeling like they have positive momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's quite interesting, isn't it? We've got two different experiences there for what adults like and what 16 to 18-year-olds like. So that's interesting. That's worth taking on board. And we're talking about reading feedback here as well. So is there a difference between candidates wanting to read feedback or wanting to receive feedback? So maybe with 16 to 18 candidates, maybe they prefer it verbally, for example. So that's something we'll look at later. Julianne, you've got your hand up there. Did you want to say something, or was that up from earlier?
Oh, I think it was up from earlier, sorry.
Oh, okay, no worries. Okay, so number 4, the feedback process is too time consuming. Okay. Are you all just being nice now? Okay, see, they're all majority low, some 3s. I mean, I personally would probably put a 5 for myself, but that's because I tend to write way too much feedback. I go extreme. Oh, 5. Charlie's put a 5. So do you think it's not too time consuming because sometimes you probably don't put that much into it, or you don't write enough for some people, maybe, if you were honest with yourself?
I would say, if I can just speak for myself, if it's done sort of timely, it's less of a burden. So if you're sort of doing it as the work comes in, it's actually easier to get the feedback done quite detailed, because some students might finish quicker or earlier than others, so it makes it a little bit easier versus to sit down and do it.
Yep, okay, very good point. Matt Cheevers, you put a 2, so you don't think it's too time consuming. Why do you think it's not time consuming for you?
I've changed my answer now, actually, after seeing Mike's. I think mine was more about ongoing feedback, face to face or over Zoom. So I think that's not too time consuming at all, because I give a lot, but in small quantities. So a lot of continual feedback. I do think that the written feedback, in terms of the workbooks, is too time consuming. And I question whether the candidate ever sees it anyway.
Yeah.
Because I don't know about me. I generally do the last bit of feedback, the written feedback, after the course is finished.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I question every time I get assessment in. Has the student actually seen this feedback? And if they haven't seen it, then there's actually no point in writing it, is there? because
Exactly.
you're just writing it for the IB. So yeah, absolutely. But in this session, we're talking about feedback in all forms. We're not just talking about assessment feedback. We're talking about feedback that you're giving them throughout the programme. So what you're saying is you don't find it too time consuming because you see value in it. It's part of your process. And that's good. That's what we want to hear.
Yeah, and I guess my feedback is often quite direct.
Mm-hmm.
So it's therefore shorter.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Right, number 5, feedback should be used as the basis for improvement rather than just a justification for a grade. So by this, if your feedback just says you've passed or well done, you've received a merit, is that good enough? Or should we be looking to help them improve always? Okay, Charlie, you put a 2 for that. You're the lowest one. We explain why you put a 2.
So sat here, I am questioning whether I've read it right, double negative wise, stuff like that. But in my opinion, it should cater for both. So if I was writing some feedback, very similar to what Matt's just said, I should always be looking to provide feedback on kind of overall improvements as well as the justification of grades. Hence where I tried to go more in between, shall we say.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next one then. Number 6, it doesn't matter what form feedback takes. Okay, Hannah, you put a 2 for that. Let's explain why you put a
2. Again, I might be confused like Charlie with the double negative, but I think it does matter depending on what work they've completed, whether it's written or verbal. So I think as long as feedback is given, obviously there needs to be appropriate depending on what they've done.
Yeah, I think with that, it's more of a, so as long as they're getting the feedback, does it have to be written, or does it have to be verbal? Does it have to be on a specific feedback form, for example, or are we saying that feedback is, as long as they're getting it and it's enriched and it's constructive, actually how they get it is not so important?
Yeah, I think as long as they do get it, that's the more important part rather than how it looks. But in terms of the form that it comes in, but I think it also does play a part that it's in an appropriate way and it, reflects what they've done in terms of what sort of work they've done to receive that feedback, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can't forget that, for evidence purposes, we always happen to provide evidence to all sorts of people. We do have to show that they've had feedback, and sometimes if it's not written down or it's not in the right place, it's difficult to evidence that. So unfortunately, we do have to do it that way sometimes. Okay, number 7, too much feedback confuses candidates. Okay. Who have we not spoken to yet? Right, I'm going to pick someone who's put 3 for this, so they're in the middle. How about Beth? Would you like to explain why you put a 3 there, Beth? Oh, okay, no worries. Beverly, you put a 3 for that, Beverly?
I knew I was next on the list. I think it depends on the learner you're speaking with, because if they've got slight learning needs, then too much information to them, they can't process it.
Yep.
So I just do think it depends on the learner.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think sometimes if you've written too much, the actual essence of it, the important part, can get lost, can't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And I think we've got our age divide as well there, haven't we? So going back to what Matthew was saying earlier, I think maybe with 16 to 18 candidates, not all of them, but some of them, if there's too much, they might choose not to read it, whereas adults may digest that a bit better.
Just in addition to that, actually, just if I may add a point, I think also there are things such as the frequency of feedback and the timeliness, the tone even. So, for example, some candidates would respond very well to be given positive feedback in front of the group. Whereas for some other candidates, that would be horrifying. So it depends very much on the candidate themselves, as Beverly mentioned, but whatever is appropriate, really. Multiple sort of little and often types of feedback might be absolutely, but actually very confusing for another person. Some people might laugh normally. So I guess it goes back to the group profile and the differentiation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would always say little and often is best, just so that they digest it, and also if they're doing it on a task by task basis, it's best to have the feedback on that task. I think Julie Ann was saying earlier, if you do it straight away while it's fresh in your mind and fresh in their mind, it's going to be a lot more effective than waiting until the end. And as Matt Stevens was saying, and then writing an end comment, which they don't see. So it's that little and often, which would build up to quite a substantial amount, but they're seeing it in smaller chunks. Okay, so then the final ones then. So number 8 and 9. So have you used recorded audio feedback? So have you given students any recorded audio feedback? And if you have you found it effective? So, Matt Cheevers, you said yes there. Is that a yes, you found it effective as well, or no?
Yeah, I've done it, and yes, I found it effective. So, to be honest, I started it with some people based on selfish reasons, that after a day of delivering on Zoom, sometimes you just don't want to type any more messages. Yeah. So I used it for a few people, probably incorrectly, because I'm not sure whether we should be using WhatsApp, but rather than type, I have just recorded an audio file of myself, which also helps them to sleep at night as well. So so I found it quite useful because it feels a bit more personal, because they can hear my dulcet tones on it as well.
I think also, I mean, it's personal, but also sometimes things can get lost in translation in the written word, can't they?
Massively.
Something which might sound negative written, can not sound negative if it's spoken. And also, as we've been saying, sometimes they don't want to read all the feedback, so they're more likely to listen to it. Okay, so it's good to see that some people have been using it. We've got quite a few people who haven't. I would be interested to know, not right now, if you haven't used it because you haven't had to, or you've avoided it for a specific reason. But we'll come back to that later. Okay, thank you for that. Any questions on any of that before we move on?
No.
No?
No.
Okay, so looking at feedback then. So mainly feedback, we're talking about teaching, learning and assessment during this. Obviously feedback is going to happen throughout your programs, and Jeremy was talking in detail earlier about well-being and giving feedback to his candidates for all sorts of different reasons, but we are talking more about teaching, learning and assessment in this session. So it's going to happen at a formative stage and it's going to happen at a summative stage. So formative feedback is our assessment for learning. So during the formative stage, it is when they are still learning. So it's before they've got to assessment, they are still learning, and every bit of feedback we give them should help them on that journey to get into that final stage of being ready to take the assessment. So feedback you give them should provide an immediate goal. It should be focused and specific to the task and immediately achievable. We want to be promoting and measuring the candidate's knowledge and skills there. So as I said, our job is to get them ready for assessment. So while they are learning and we are doing these formative assessments on them, we're measuring their skills and their knowledge, and the feedback should reflect that. So we're telling them, yep, you've got this, or no, you haven't quite got this yet. It helps them to understand the limits of their own knowledge and how to improve. And you can focus it on the class or the individual more effectively to meet the learning needs of that group or that individual. So some people have been talking about whether they would give feedback as a whole group. So I think that was you, Jeremy. You said some people would enjoy that, some people wouldn't. And also, I think it was Beverly was talking about learning needs as well. So with formative feedback, you can really drill that down and make sure you are meeting the needs of each group and every individual. And also then it allows you to focus your efforts. So by looking at feedback that you've given people, if you look and see that actually all of the people in your group have got that concept and you've put that in the feedback, that means you can move away from that concept now and you can then start to spend time on something new. So summative feedback is different because it's an assessment of the learning. So it's basically an evaluation or a review of what they've done already. At this point, this is not going to help them with their assessment because their assessment is complete. So we're not helping them learn at this point, but that's not to say that it shouldn't be constructive because we want to try and help them for the future. So rather than providing an immediate goal, something they can achieve now, we're going to look at more long-lasting, long-term goals, which means that it's going to be a bit more general to the subject or to the candidate, rather than you need to learn more about this particular concept. It will be more general to the topic or to their skills. It provides an evaluation of how the candidate has learned, and it's often connected to the grade. So the feedback would say, well done, you have passed, or well done, you have achieved a merit. So feedback on work, our formative feedback. So a really important part of providing feedback on work is annotating on the SPAG. That was our acronym earlier. I think it was Balbel told us what that one was. So that's our spelling, punctuation and grammar. Because as tutors, even if we're not teaching them English, we should always be trying to improve their skills in those areas if we can. So picking out spelling, punctuation, grammar at the formative learning stage, trying to help them before they reach the final assessment. And that's not to say you go through and put red pen on everything, but going through either helping them with the spellings, depending on their needs, or if you think they're up to it, just picking out where the spelling mistakes are and asking them to look at those themselves. But also looking at the punctuation and the grammar as well, and trying to help them with things like using commas and paragraphs and sentence structure. They're really, really important, and they're things that we should be helping them with. It's also good practice to reference the specific criteria on there. So as you're going through the work, picking out where it meets a certain criteria. So, oh, this is 1.1, for example, because not only does it help the candidate know when they've achieved that criteria, but later on, it's going to help the internal verifier and the standards verifier, because they can go directly to that point to see whether that evidence meets the criteria. And then obviously on your formative feedback, you're going to be identifying any gaps in learning. So that's the stage where you're going to be picking out things that they still need to do. But it is important not to specify too much. You need to be quite general. You can't say, I need you to write this about this in these exact words. So you can't rewrite it for them, but you need to be giving them some clues towards what it is that they need to do to improve. And then obviously we also want to motivate them. So we highlight what they have done well. So even if it's the most useless piece of assessment you've ever seen or the useless piece of work, we should always be trying to pick out something. The fact that they've even done it could be the positive there. So well done for your effort, well done for completing this. However, okay, any questions on all of that? No? Okay, so this is something that I shared with you in my last CPD session on assessment. So I won't run through it all now, but this just goes through the different stages of feedback. So during the teaching and learning stage, during the assessment stage, and then also following the assessment, and the kind of things that should be included. And as discussed previously, feedback is most important during that teaching and learning stage. That's where we're looking for the most robust, enriched feedback. And actually, that's the stage which you're going to find hardest to evidence. So assessment, obviously you hand that in, the internal verifier sees that. But during the teaching and learning stage, you're going to be giving them all sorts of lovely feedback that's really beneficial, but most people won't ever see that or know that you've done it. So that's the hardest one that's to evidence. Okay, so I was going to have a play with putting people in a room here, but I don't think I'm going to actually, because we're running out of time. Okay, we'll do this individually then. So we've looked at what feedback is and how it relates to assessment and teaching and learning. I want you to have a think about providing feedback remotely now. Now, most of you have done this because we've obviously been in this crazy pandemic. We all know that meaningful feedback should be personal, it should be task related, it should be specific, positive, and it should be timely. Each of these have their own challenges, whether within the classroom or whilst remote learning. So what are the barriers and challenges of remote feedback? I'm going to give you, let's say, 3 minutes just to note some of those down. And there's a couple of things that you can reflect upon here. So feedback is powerful in the learning process if used effectively. Face-to-face teaching comes with a range of informal opportunities for formal feedback to individuals, small groups, and whole classes. Without these opportunities, how can teachers ensure that their feedback is effective and that candidates respond to it? As teachers, we constantly look for clues that can help us understand the impact of our decisions. Are we doing things that are working? How do we know? And also, when teaching in a physical classroom, you will look for patterns in participation and body language. Non-verbal clues will give you some sense of what candidates might be thinking. So 3 minutes, what are the barriers and challenges to remote feedback? And there's just 3 reflection points there on the screen if you'd like to look at them. And then we'll have a chat about them. You guys get on with that. I'll be back in just a moment.
I don't know how much, but
no.
Well, she hasn't told me if I get all the 10% or not. She's wanting to calculate.
Sorry, I was on mute then. I didn't realise. Okay, we'll leave it there. So let me come out of this so that I can type on the screen as I'm doing that. Okay, I hope this is going to work. Okay, who would like to share one of their barriers or challenges with me? Would you like to raise your hand so we don't have everyone shouting out at once? Go on then, Matt Cheevers.
One of the challenges is not being able to see their body language, what they're doing, whether they're engaged, whether their reaction to what you're saying.
So not being able to see their body language.
How they're reacting to your feedback, whether you need to change your style.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you very much. Anybody else? I think Victoria, you had your hand up.
Yes.
Sorry, you're on mute, Victoria.
Sorry, yes. Matt's just taken my point. I was going to say something about this virtual world, and that it has created a hidden barrier in that we can't always see all the interactions of the student, especially if they choose not to show their faces. And I know that's something Matt talked about when we had some training courses. So I know that it's also difficult to engage students who might be shy. In a virtual world, it's harder to physically connect with a student on a one-to-one level. In the classroom, physically, we can walk around and speak to a student without everyone knowing that this person is struggling and needs a bit more one-to-one support. In a virtual world, you know, everyone's there. How do you engage one particular student who's slipping away and bring them back in?
Yeah.
You know, but of course, the facility to take people into separate rooms must certainly be a way of dealing with that. But the virtual world creates all sorts of barriers, yeah, to learning, including psychological impacts around the whole COVID situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Who else? Jeremy.
Yeah, I think this point leads on from what Victoria was just saying about the walking around aspect, but it's slightly different. I'm thinking it can be harder to check somebody's work on the fly. And what I mean by that is from a, in inverted commas, walk around point of view. So just being there present in the class when they're going ahead on a task, you know, you can just sort of just gauge, actually, there'll be certain candidates that just, you know, that might need a bit of encouragement, or conversely, it might be trying to race ahead, or that might be getting distracted or distracting someone else. So you can sort of just gauge how they're doing on their work and just, you know, it's almost like sort of making little adjustments to their work and adding points or ensuring they add points and things, just keeping everybody at the same level and on the same page. Whereas you can't physically see it on the call unless you keep asking them to hold it, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also, I mean, as you say, you can sort of catch them before they've gone too far with it when they're in the classroom as well, can't you? Whereas if they're doing it at home, then they're obviously going to complete the whole thing before it comes into you, and then it's a much bigger job to fix.
Yeah.
And also, you don't want to demotivate them if they've spent a couple of hours doing it to then tell them that they've done it wrong.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Mike, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, there's, for those that we never see their face, so it's just by email or phone, there is a danger that they may dwell on it or interpret what you've said the wrong way. And I've noticed this a couple of times. Obviously, face to face, you just sit there and you just get through it until they leave happy. You know, but it can be misinterpreted. There's a danger that they might dwell on it or take it the wrong way inadvertently.
Yeah, absolutely. as we were saying earlier, it can just get a bit lost in translation sometimes, can't it?
Yeah.
And also sometimes people don't pick out the positive stuff, they only see the negative as well. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but it's how you structure that feedback as well. Matthew, Jeff.
Yeah, with some things like particularly maths, as an example, if you're trying to explain a concept or show a candidate the correct way to work something out, you don't have the opportunity to draw it out on a scrap bit of paper or a whiteboard. If you're just doing it virtually, you've not got that rough working out kind of space to offer that particular candidate.
Absolutely. So we're talking about meeting their needs now, aren't we? Excellent, thanks very much. Who else have we got? Jeremy?
Yeah, sorry, do you want to remind me of the point, sorry?
Did you have your hand up, Jeremy, or not?
Oh, no, that was from before,
No.
sorry.
Oh, okay. Prishka then, Prishka.
I find when I'm teaching online, that there's a bit of, I would say, a lack of privacy in giving feedback. Sometimes you ask a candidate a question, or they offer to answer a question, and maybe they're so way out. And if you were in a normal classroom, maybe in a couple of minutes after, when other people start doing other work, you could have walked to their side and just told them, given them some feedback and guided them. But in front of the entire class that's logged in, that can be quite, you can actually see it can be quite difficult, the amount of details you can go into, because in a way you don't want to sound like they are so wrong, which they actually are, but you don't want to tell them that in front of the rest of the class. And you've got an hour session planned, or an hour 15 minutes. By the time you come back to it, you have to give them a private call and all that. Delayed feedback is not quite the same.
Yeah, 100%. Didn't think of that, actually. Thank you. Matt Cheevers?
I was going to say class sizes. I think the move from classroom to being remote has definitely, for me, increased the number of people on my courses. So therefore you have a time constraint.
Yeah.
Or if you're in a group of, say, up to 40 people, there are always those that dominate your attention.
Yeah. And it's difficult, you can't see everybody on the screen, can you?
Exactly,
so if you've got the same people participating all the time, they're the ones that you're going to constantly see. And
it's human nature to respond to them more than other people,
Yeah, particularly I think it depends what platform you're using as well, because I'm obviously using Teams. Now I can only see 7 of you, and then everybody else is along the bottom. So I might naturally, not go to the people that I can't see on there. Bal? Thanks, Matt.
Internet and equipment, or lack thereof.
Yeah, okay. What do you mean by that?
So we've had it in this session where connection keeps dropping. Can't hear you properly. Some people might not even have laptops or phone or tablet, or they might not have connection. They might not have. I had a student back in the last year who didn't have a SIM card, so getting hold of him was an absolute nightmare. So that's another issue. Whereas if you're in a classroom, like a physical classroom, you can be there. And also another point is distractions.
Yeah, somebody, Victoria's just said that as well in the chat bar. Distractions, you mean of the home?
Yeah, so just general, because like if I'm using my example at the moment, we're getting our kitchen done, and obviously you're moving house, Jen. So if you're trying to teach a class and all that's going around you, it's difficult, and it's hard to try and drown all that out and try and just focus on teaching a candidate or teaching a student.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, a couple more. Matthew Vine.
Yeah, the thing I had from March when we were doing the 16 to 18s virtually, sometimes it's difficult to get hold of the candidates, but also get hold of their parents or next of kin. So obviously you want to try and get contact for them, and then it obviously sometimes ends up in having to actually visit the house. So then that takes time out your day, having to go up and drop work, go and collect work, where you could be alternatively having everyone at the same place.
Yep, absolutely. Comes down to those time constraints again, doesn't it? Yeah. Thank you. Mike?
Sorry, there's no peer reinforcement. If you're in a classroom, well done, or you might not even have to say it. The peers will all, do it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, we're going to do two more. So I've got Matt Cheevers and then Jeremy with their hands up. So Matt, if you go first.
Yeah, the one bizarre thing that I miss in terms of feedback is break times, and also before class and after class, because I used to use that time when if people turned up early or stayed behind or they were milling around at break times, that was often a good opportunity to catch up with them and talk to them individually and give them feedback and listen to their feedback. Whereas remote learning is very time orientated. You log on at 9:30, it starts, you start, there's not kind of any breakout or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that would be often when you check on their well-being, wouldn't it, during those times? And that's a little bit lost.
Yeah, 100%.
Now, isn't it? Yeah, very good point. And thank you. Finally, Jeremy.
I think well-being is a massive issue.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, this point leads directly on from that, actually. I'm thinking often in the classes when it's in person, the candidates get to know each other, and they often become friends, actually. So, which is excellent for their well-being, of course, and excellent for their social skills, confidence, self-esteem, etc., reconnecting with society, those kind of things. And I think that can be a little bit inhibited on remote learning platforms just by its nature of being a little bit less intuitive and kind of connected face to face, as it were, or in person.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Right, I'm going to put that back onto slideshow. Just give me a moment. I'm sure there's a way on Teams of doing this without having to come out of the slideshow, but I haven't learnt it yet.
I think we could look at that, Jen. I think there's a whiteboard feature. I think. Yeah,
definitely. I know on Zoom you've got a pen, haven't you? So you can write on the screen. Okay, so just jotted down some of the things you said there. I mean, some of them I hadn't even thought about. Obviously, I'm not working the same way you guys are. So I can sit up here in my ivory tower going, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. But you guys are on the ground and you're experiencing this every day and these real life challenges and barriers. And it's really interesting to hear. Now, that's not to say that we don't try. Obviously, we'll keep trying. But, I completely get it and I completely understand that all of these things make it very, very difficult. And I think the biggest worry that's been highlighted is that, we're not now getting that personable relationship, that check on well-being, that informal checks on well-being that you'd have if you were seeing them in the classroom and you were meeting with them at break time, or you were just listening to conversations they might be having with other people in their class. And that's the biggest worry with all of this, isn't it? So that's something that we need to be conscious of moving forward, and looking at ways that we can try and recreate that as much as possible. But that's not to say there's not, lots of different barriers standing in our way, such as what Matt said, class sizes. If you've got 20 candidates in a class, you can't every single day speak to them all individually to check on their well-being. But it may be that even if just once a week, you arrange a one-to-one chat with them, for example. But we'll have a look at that in a sec. Anything else anybody wanted to add to that I think is really important before we move on? Someone's got their hand up there. No. Do you mean to have your hand up, Matt Cheevers, or is that from earlier?
It's from earlier, sorry.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so what I want you to have a think about now is, when teaching remotely, it's easy to get all the ways you would give feedback to candidates if you were in a classroom. So a lot of them would have been covered by what you've just talked about there. So what I'd like you to do is just draw 2 columns on your piece of paper. In the first column, I just want you to think about the ways that you give feedback in person or when you're in a classroom. And then in column 2, just start to think about what the remote alternatives could be. So classroom feedback, informal break, as Matt just said, break time, informal well-being check and feedback. What, in an ideal world, could an alternative be to that? So let's just have, again, we'll have 5 minutes. The important thing there is I want you to think of as many classroom feedback techniques or in-person feedback techniques as you can think of. So get all of those down first and then start to look at the alternatives. Does that make sense? Everybody okay with that? Shout now if you don't. Okay, there's just another reflection point on the screen for you there that you might want to refer to if you're struggling. Think of anything. So think about the differences between how and when you would give one-to-one feedback at a candidate's desk. So as Prishka was saying earlier, when you just stand and whisper in their ear so nobody else can hear. Whole class verbal feedback, which I think Jeremy was talking about, and also individual written feedback. Okay, so just 1 more minute, guys. Okay, so we're going to leave it there. Right, so we'll just share some of your ideas. Let's look at trying to go down my list, see who hasn't spoken yet. What about Danielle Guntrip? Are you able to talk, Danny, or not? Oh, no mic. Okay. What about Julianne?
Yeah, I can talk. So
what classroom feedback would you give?
So I had written individual verbal feedback. So maybe they've completed a task and they either got one of them wrong or maybe didn't understand it, or their answers weren't in depth enough. I would give them verbal feedback, sort of face to face, after looking through their work.
Yeah.
And then the alternative, I'd put down, because right now I'm using Google Classroom with my students. So with that platform, every time they submit work, I can give them a private comment. So that's the way I record their feedback individually to them. So it's a comment that only they can see relating to the work that they've just submitted.
Excellent. That's good. That's good that you can give a private comment on there.
Yeah.
Is that working well for you?
Yeah, absolutely. They all understand how to use it.
Okay. So that individual verbal classroom feedback, that's you going to the candidate's desk or they're coming to your desk, looking at the work as they do it and giving them immediate verbal feedback on what they've done, or even written feedback if you're writing on the paper, and getting them to amend it straight away. And that is something which is lost in remote learning. There's no, there's nothing you can do about that, because they are going to, as we said earlier, they're going to do the whole thing before they send it to you in most cases. Even today, I'm asking you to do something for 5 minutes. I have absolutely no idea if you get it, if you're gauging it, if you understand how much you're writing. I mean, you could just be scribbling on a piece of paper and not actually writing anything. And that is lost, isn't it? So yeah, really the only way we can do it is by getting them to send all the work in and obviously writing our recommendations on it. So Google Classroom is a good way of doing that. Does anybody have any other suggestions in terms of that one-to-one informal classroom verbal feedback that you would give?
Just on Google Classroom and following on for that comment, if they're happy with it, and to get the peer involvement, I will share something that I think is exceptional, or maybe not exceptional, but that so the others can also comment on it, which seems to go down quite well, especially when we're doing like posters or things like that. In the non-accredited sections, sometimes I like to post people's work if they're happy, and then the group comment on it as well. And generally, it's been
good. Yeah. So That's on Google Classroom as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you say, do you ask them before you share it, or do you just, are they happy for you to share?
Yeah, they've always been happy to share, to be honest. I've said to them, I'll load it up on Classroom, and rather than me doing it, and they're mostly happy to do it, to be honest. Those that are a bit shy said, oh no, you do it for me, but generally it's quite a good thing. Get to see how people's work.
Yeah, excellent. That's good. I like that. Any other ideas from anybody? No? Okay, so let's look at a different classroom feedback technique then. Here we go. Well, would anybody like to share one? Go on then, Matt Chivers, you've got your hand up.
My one's on SPAG, because with the short nature of the courses and the numbers on the courses, it's very difficult to do a lot of SPAG. So I promote heavily their use of Grammarly. And the good thing about Grammarly is, well, one, it's free. But the second thing, Grammarly is quite a nice feature, is they email you and tell you how you're improving. And they tell you how many words different words you've used in a week, month, and kind of give you almost like a star rating based on your use of spelling and grammar. So that's quite.
I've not heard of this. Is this is it free?
It's free. Nada, nothing. Yeah, so it really, I mean, I use it for everything. So, and it has taught me a lot about grammar, especially. So yeah, I get them to use that tool and get them blending that into their work, making sure that every time I set them a task around their employability documents, like CV covering letters, you know, that I'm saying to them, I'm not even going to look at it until you've put it through Grammarly. So it's self-learning.
Yeah, and that's great really as well, self-directed.
Yeah.
So does it tell them what they have done wrong, or does it just correct it?
Yeah, no, it tells them what they've done wrong, gives them the opportunity. So it's like the one that you get on your laptop, but the one you get on your laptop, I don't think is very good. So this is like with bells on it. So it's it gives them suggestions for how they can change spelling, but also the context of a sentence. So it focuses heavily on a favourite thing of mine, which is sort of using fewer words rather than a lot. So yeah, and every month they send you an email going, "Oh, well done, you're amazing, you're in our top 5% of spellers." It's really
that
interactive.
Sounds amazing. And Mike's just shared the link for it in the chat box there. Thank you, Mike.
He's like my assistant. Mike is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's your PA.
He's my Debbie McGee.
Brilliant. Okay, so has anybody else got any alternatives to that SPAG, that improvement of English or literacy that you would give them in the classroom? Any ideas?
It was mentioning
Sorry, what was that?
Peer correction, is that possible virtually? That would be my suggestion. But I don't know if that's...
Sorry, I missed the first bit. What did you say at the start?
Peer correction of work.
Peer correction?
Yeah.
So how do you think that would work?
If it was possible to go into a virtual room where they can, I guess it would have to be screenshot, wouldn't it? And they'd have to have some technical knowledge of how to send their work to someone.
Yeah.
Perhaps it could be tricky.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would depend on the students, but yeah, that may work for smaller groups or for certain students. I mean, the self-directed or the peer assessment is, you know, it is really, really important, and that can also then encourage more interaction between them and getting to know each other a bit more, couldn't it?
Yeah.
So it's definitely something to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, anybody got a different classroom feedback technique? We'll look at two more. Jeremy?
In the physical classes, I'd very often, normally once a day at least, be having little kind of aside chats with people, and it might be more to do with aspects that are going on with them personally or in their lives. I guess I'm, referring to the context of wellbeing courses now. But actually, I've not really found it a major inhibitor with the remote learning platforms. I'll either do things like just ask if they can stay for a few minutes at the end of a Zoom call, or book in an individual Zoom call that's probably a little bit more formal. But sometimes they like that actually because they want a proper 15-minute discussion or whatever, or just a phone call actually. So
So how often do you do that, Jeremy?
Definitely about once every couple of days at the minute, I would say. Yeah, I think.
And how many candidates are we talking? So it's manageable every couple of days for how many candidates?
It's probably about it's probably a couple of them, I think. So it's probably only 2, sometimes 3, because those people might need, regular catch-ups, just to sort of keep on track. But not everybody. It's just where merited, and also I think it's important not to overdo it as well, because we're trying to make people stand on their own 2 feet. But and also typically it might happen more towards the beginning of the course as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I think that's more based on need of the candidate, isn't it? It's, so I think the tutor gauging how much interaction or how much time they need to spend with each candidate. I do think it is really important that they are hearing our voices, that I know they're hearing our voice on Zoom, but that personal touch. But as I say, it comes down to what they need, how often you do that. So for some people, it may only be once a week for 5 minutes, a quick check-in, let's see how you're getting on. Whereas for other people, you may need to do like every day or every 2 days, as Jeremy says. But as I've said, that's definitely something which doesn't get the attention it needs in the remote environment. And particularly if you've got a whole load of candidates, you've got loads of them, fitting in, talking to all of them as much as you would like to, it is going to be difficult. And there's not many alternatives to that. Okay, thank you, Jeremy. One more classroom feedback technique. Anybody got one? So what about the whole class verbal feedback? Anybody got any alternatives to how you do that?
That's another Google Classroom one. Well, typically for me, just like an end of week statement or great day, great week, guys. Let's keep the momentum going. Just something like that as a board for everyone.
So like an end of week sort of motivational.
Yeah, or Monday morning, something like that.
Yeah. Anybody doing anything different to that they'd like to share?
Yes.
Yeah.
For the whole class verbal feedback, at the end of the session of an online session where you've been, say, teaching a topic in maths or in English, sometimes you just give all of them feedback. This is what we've done today. This is what you've done well. This is where I think you need to improve. You could go to Skills Forward, make sure you go to Skills Forward and do such and such. So it's still verbal, and it's the same way you would do it in class. It's just that it's online because it's an online class.
Yeah. So did you say that, is it generalized as a group? I think it's done. Yeah,
generalized at the end of the class session, at the end of a lesson, just general feedback to the whole class.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Prishka. Okay, right, we're going to move on because we're swiftly running out of time. But hopefully, obviously, the purpose of that is for you just to share things that you're already doing. I will share the PowerPoint after, and I'll add these in. I haven't written them in now, but I will add them in, the things that you've said. But please continue to share those ideas for those alternatives, because you might be doing something that somebody else hasn't thought of, or you might be doing something that they didn't think would work that, you know, is working really well. I definitely want to have a look at Google Classroom, because that's something which I've heard just brilliant things about, and I'd like to know more about that, because it seems to do so much. Okay, so remote feedback methods. So as I've said already, it is really important that they're still hearing our voice, these candidates. So we want to be using a combination of both audio and visual feedback. So email is the biggest one, I think, for people at the moment. I know you're using Google Classroom and stuff as well, but with email, you can get a lot down and sent to them. And also, obviously, with certain things, it can save you time, because you can copy and paste certain elements and then individualize it. Video recordings. So we talked at the beginning about those audio recordings. So you just recording yourself, giving them the feedback, and sending it to them. One, it's going to save you time, as Matt Cheevers was saying. So rather than having to keep typing it, it's going to save you a little bit of time, because you can just say it. But also then things aren't getting lost in translation, and it's a bit more personable for them. Face-to-face, using the video conferencing platforms that we've talked about, over the telephone. So for those that don't have the technology. And then particularly when we're looking at SPAG and all the formative assessment, directly on their work, putting notations and annotations on their work and sending it back to them. And there's a couple of ways that you can do that. I'm not an expert, I'm sure you know more than me, but a couple that I've been looking at is, obviously you can just do it on Word, you can just add comments in and send it back. You can use dictation software. So I was having a little play at home yesterday. If you're using Google Classroom and Google Docs, you can use something called Mote. Has anybody used that, by the way? Has anybody looked at Mote?
No, not heard of it.
It's really good. It took me, I'd say, 2 minutes to download it, and you just click on it and then you talk, and it records it over the bit that you want to record it, and then you send it back to them. So again, it saves you time, and I say it's compatible with Google Classroom and Google Docs, so have a look at that. And then the other thing I was just having a little play around with this morning is screen capture technology. So again, is anybody familiar with screen capture? Has anybody used it?
Yeah, I have, yeah.
Who's that?
That's me, Valve.
Valve. Which one have you used, Valve? Can you remember?
So I've got the Adobe Creative Suite, and I use that for editing.
Okay.
Also,
I've used Screencaster.
So Adobe Screencaster.
No, that's two separate softwares. So
okay.
I don't know who said Screencaster.
Lisa.
Okay, so there's that. There's Adobe Creative Suite, which I use, and also QuickTime also do it as well. And you can which part of the screen you want to use.
So would that work? Would any of those work for written work that people send to you? Would it work for that, or is this more for sort of audio recording?
It should do. I don't see why it shouldn't. But if anyone's got any more knowledge on it, then you can override me.
Yeah, I think you can definitely use it. I think what you could do is, so I use it predominantly for my Padlet videos that I set up, and I talk people through and then say what I'm doing. So you could absolutely highlight the bits of their work that you're kind of talking about, and then you could scroll down and talk through it. So yeah, absolutely, it could work. And it's free, so not the Adobe one, but the Screencaster one is.
So I've just got a little video that I found on one this morning. I'll just show you it very quickly. Can you see that on the screen?
Yeah.
YouTube? Yeah, okay. Oh, no sound. No, there's no sound for some reason.
If you send the link, Jen, it might be easier.
Yeah, I will do. I'll send the PowerPoint. It's got the link in it.
Okay.
But so yeah, I don't know a huge amount about it, but I was having a play this morning, and this one came up. So this was for, hold on a second. Oh, I haven't written it down. Anyway, it says it on the link. I'll include it in the email that I sent to you. Yeah, so screen capture technology is similar to dictation software, but that dictation software that I found is only compatible with Google Classroom and Google Docs, whereas with different types of screen capture technology, you can do it on any documents, on any Microsoft Word, etc. documents, and it just allows you to highlight bits of information and then talk over it, and then it records it and sends it back to them. So again, it's that whole not getting lost in translation issue. And this is the way the world's going. Things are getting more digital. That's not to say that you shouldn't be writing feedback to them. Writing is important because, you know, they still need to see the written word, and it is really that, you know, that is important. But to save some time and to also make it more personable, there's some really good options. And again, if you guys are using anything which hasn't been covered that you think would be helpful, then please share that. Share that with your colleagues, and we'll make sure everybody knows about it. Okay, any questions at all before we swiftly move on? Okay, so just very quickly just going through some general feedback tips here. So not necessarily just for remote learning, but just in general feedback tips. So feedback should be clear. We all know that. It means that the information should be delivered in easy to understand chunks. So as we said earlier, break it down. Don't just give them loads of reams of information where things may get caught up and they might lose the important section. So break it down task by task and give it to them in a timely manner. It should be owned, so be sure to share ideas rather than give advice. Use phrases like I thought and I felt. So you don't just say to them, this is wrong. You say, I feel that this could be improved, for example. Feedback should be positive and negative. It may be difficult to find something wrong with a piece of work, but that is commendable, but it is the exception. So try and find something good in it or something that can be improved upon. Attached to that, it should be constructive. So telling a student that something is wrong does not help nearly as much as showing them how to make it right. Constructive feedback builds students up by showing them how to improve. So we need to make sure that we're not just saying it is wrong, but we are telling them what they need to do in order to improve. So please go and have a look at this. Please go away and research that. As I said earlier, we don't want to be too specific. We can't say you have to write about this and this and this, but we need to say go and look in this direction. This is what you need to do. Check your work for spelling mistakes. There are loads in there. Or please go and improve the spelling mistakes I have highlighted, for example. It should be realistic. So any goal set as a result of the feedback should be achievable. So we want them to be able to achieve those short-term goals. So we just need to make sure it is achievable for them, particularly for the formative feedback where we want to see those improvements before they reach the assessment. And it should be negotiable. So you need to give them the opportunity to read it and to talk to you about it. And if they're never seeing that feedback, then it's just pointless, isn't it? So whether they would prefer that to be a written conversation or whether it's a verbal conversation or whether it's written and then you ask them to directly respond to it, that depends on your candidate. But that is part of the feedback process. It's a two-way process. It should be specific, not general. So target the individual, their needs, and link it to specific criteria and tasks. So just a well done, Joe Bloggs, you have achieved this task, and that's it, doesn't really tell us anything. We need it to be more specific. We need to know exactly what they've achieved and what they've done. It should be timely. We've talked about this already. It needs to be fresh in their minds, and it also needs to be fresh in your mind, because it's going to make it a lot easier for you to write it. It doesn't become such a big job. And it should be positive. So even if you're telling them that they've not done something right, try and put a positive spin on it. It's about how you use the language. And again, sometimes that can get lost in written feedback, and it might come across better if you're doing it verbally. So things like, that's a really great start, but perhaps you could, or you're on the right track, you're not quite there yet. And then feedback should reference prior learning. So talk about things that they've already done, encourage them to look at things that they, to access their prior understanding and their knowledge, just to keep improving on that long-term knowledge, long-term memory. So make connections, is what I'm trying to say. I did tell you my mind's all over the place today, please forgive me. Do you remember how we did this last time? Have another think about that one. Did you think about? Okay, anything anybody would like to add to that before we move on? Okay, so methods for giving constructive feedback. We're just going to look at two of them briefly. Everybody knows of this one. I know it's called something a lot ruder. I'm a lady. The feedback sandwich, or the sandwich as some people like to call it. This is the most common method, whether you know you're using it or not. You give a positive comment, constructive criticism, and then a positive comment. I think this particularly happens when you're giving feedback verbally, and I know that I use it when I'm giving people observation feedback, for example. I'll always start on positive, because you want to start the conversation good. I'll then give them some sort of constructive criticism, and I can't just leave it there, because I see your little faces looking at me like, really? Oh, I thought I did really well. And then I'd be like, oh yeah, you did really, really well. It was great. You know, I just feel like I have to end it with something really positive. And I think we all just do it naturally. The only problem with that is that sometimes that constructive feedback can get lost in the middle, because they hear something good and then they hear something good again. And sometimes that bit might get lost. So if you are giving that verbally, you've got to be careful about that. And then the other one, another popular one, is the medal and mission method. So this is similar, but this is giving them the positive, sort of giving them something they've done well, which is the medal, and then giving them some information about what they need to improve on. So that's the mission. So with this one, you've got to think about what went well, what did they do well, and it would be even better if, and then telling them what they could do to improve. And that one is one that you use more in written feedback, I think. Okay, any questions about those? Okay, the last thing we're going to look at, just really quickly, is feedback from candidates. So it is really important to remember that feedback goes both ways. So when we're talking about feedback, we're not just talking about the feedback that you give your candidates, but it's really important that we're also getting feedback from them as well. And again, this would happen naturally in the classroom, because you would see those clues, you'd see their body language, you'd see how much they're writing, you'd be looking over their shoulder and seeing if they're grasping the concept, you'd be looking at their faces and seeing whether they want to answer a question or not. And you're not getting that as much with remote learning. So it's really important that we're still getting that feedback from them during the class to make sure that they are happy and that they're understanding. So what do you think the benefits are of gaining feedback from candidates? Let's have a look at, what would anybody like to tell me? Go on then, Matthew Vine.
I think it's beneficial, like if you do a course and you know you're going to deliver that course again. So like personal point of view, done a level 3 a couple of times, done course success a couple of times. You know what units worked well, how you delivered it, what went well, what didn't go well. So when you get in the future, you know you can improve it or keep it the same, whatever you need to do.
Yeah, so it helps you for your professional development and for future courses.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Matthew, Jeff?
Yeah, you can gauge how successful your sort of imparting of knowledge has been if you get the feedback from the candidates. Like maybe they haven't understood the way that you've explained it. Maybe you need to change your approach a bit, throw a few more like tactile active activities in for them to anchor their knowledge before you get into the actual nitty gritty of the concepts. But without that feedback, you wouldn't know that.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt Cheevers, you just said there about the exit survey. Sorry, I'm trying to bring up the conversation.
Yeah, sorry, I was being lazy by typing it. We ask for an exit survey to be done at the end of every course. Never ever seen a collation of what people have said from that. So I think
I know that does happen. So there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't see it.
Never seen it. Jenna. Anyone else seen it?
I don't.
I usually see it. Yeah.
Maybe it's just because it's really bad then on mine, so they don't send to me.
I'll ask about that because it does happen. It all gets collaborated, and it's something that we have to do for the funder as well, and for Ofsted. So yeah, absolutely, that would help for the future. But I do think, I mean, that's an end of course survey. I do think it's obviously still important to get feedback on individual sessions, because they'll obviously forget stuff that happened during the programme, and it will be more generalised. So getting feedback just each session, different ways we can do that. So we can use exit slips. This is something which I always use, and I'm going to ask you to do at the end of this session. Different types of questions you can ask them. Tell me one thing you found helpful today. What is one thing you think could be improved from today? So you're asking them directly about you. What is one thing you're proud of from this lesson today? What is one thing you'd like to improve on? Or what I'm going to ask you today at the end of this session is, today I have learned, ask them to think of at least one thing, and questions that I might still have, again, ask them one thing. A couple of you got your hands up. Jeremy?
I find the candidate feedback really useful if I am experimenting with different ways of delivering things. So, for example, if I've devised a new exercise that I want to try out, a new activity, I can find out if it's been as simple as it could be to understand, or maybe it is too simple. Maybe it needs to be a little bit more challenging. And I know this goes back to the candidate differentiation, but I just find it useful to help sort of optimize things on the go, if you like, by getting that open feedback. They've got to be confident enough to feel they can give feedback, though, but I think that's important to set that parameter at the start of the programme.
So is that the feedback? Is that feedback you get from them every lesson or every week? How do you do that?
I would say for me, I like to set the parameters at the start of the course that this is open and this is inclusive and it's respectful. So they feel they can give me feedback the same as I'm giving them feedback. I think it helps with their confidence. So I would say anecdotal, unstructured feedback I find is as important as the more formal, structured feedback. Actually, it can be very telling if people think, the instructions on something were maybe a little bit too complicated, or they'd like to do more of that type of work. Maybe they've got to illustrate something, or it's sort of just anecdotal feedback on the fly.
Yeah. So that's going to help you to identify their needs, and it's going to help you identify what works, what doesn't work for that particular individual, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And also the class as a whole, in a way, because again, if there's similar feedback from multiple sources, then it might identify a bit of a pattern.
Yeah.
But it's helped me in the past quite a bit. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, maybe not every single live lesson that you're doing, but, you know, something that should be happening a lot of the time, just to check that you've had engagement there. Asking them those questions at the end. If you haven't been able to get them to interact with you throughout, asking those questions just to make sure that there has been some engagement there. And trying to get them to be honest, you know, is there something that's been said that you don't understand? Is that why you haven't interacted? Because let's look at that now, and we can look at that individually. So it's building that trust with them.
Yeah.
Did somebody just say something then? Sorry. Okay, Matthew Wilmot, have you got your hand up?
Sorry, it was unintentional from before. I forgot to take it down.
Okay, so exit slips are a really good idea, and obviously we know about student surveys. We've talked about them already, but as Jeremy was saying, you know, it doesn't just have to be the end of course student surveys which get sent out from admin. It could just be something that you make up yourself, and it might just be to ask them, you know, was this easy to understand? Did you like the way we did this? Did you not? Just for your own development and to help in the future. But again, it's how you do it, because some may shy away from, if you sent them a survey monkey every single day, they might just choose not to do it. But if you ask them a couple of questions during the session, when you've got them there, maybe that would work better. Anything else anybody wants to add about ways that they get feedback from candidates, and anything that's worked for them during remote delivery? No? Okay. Okay, so we're coming to the end. Let me just... So today we've explored strategies for giving appropriate feedback. We've looked at the role of formative and summative feedback. We've looked at the barriers and the challenges to providing feedback remotely. We've looked at remote feedback methods and methods of giving constructive feedback, as well as the importance of gaining feedback from candidates. I will send this slide out, and I will make sure you've got the link in there to the screencast. Sorry, I can't remember the name of it for the life of me, but it does say it in there. Have a look at that, because it is, I think, really, really useful. And have a look at the moat as well, because again, that's really useful. There's an exit slip on the screen. You can either write it in the chat bar if you don't mind sharing it, or you can send me an email, so it's individual or private message. If you could just tell me one thing you think you might have learned today, and if you have any questions about anything, you just note those down. Again, helps with me with my delivery. I apologise that it's been a bit clunky today. My head is really not there. If there's anything I've missed, let me know, and I can cover it with you individually. Thank you very much for your time. I'll stay on for a couple more minutes if anybody wants to have
really, sorry, Jen, really quickly. Can I hijack a couple of moments? Is that all right?
Yeah, go for it.
I might hand over to Mr. Matthew Cheevers as well. So Lisa sent out first of all, thank you very much for that, Jen, as well. I didn't mean to just completely interrupt. Yeah, really good session. Yeah, Lisa sent around an email, I think, on Wednesday, just about an opportunity for, really exciting opportunity for some of the roles that we're offering at SSG and the pre-employment training that Mr. Matthew Cheevers will be delivering next week. Matt, I don't know if you want to just come in here about opportunities to recruit, just to kind of highlight that again at all.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. So we've got a number of positions across the business. So this is your opportunity to have a real positive impact on recruiting your future colleagues, which is quite interesting. So we are starting a course on Wednesday. The courses will last for 3 weeks. The first week will be covering all of the employability skills, so CVs, covering letters, how to apply for jobs, all of those sorts of things. The second week will be more specific on SSG, so they will be researching the business and preparing their tailored applications to the positions of SSG. And then week 3 is going to be one-to-one training with me, and also anyone that completes the course gets a guaranteed interview for a position of their choice. So it's a really great opportunity to think back for all those past learners that you may have worked with, not just recent, but in the past, who you think would be a real asset to our business moving forward.
Yeah, lovely stuff. Yeah, thanks, Matt. Hit the nail on the head there. So if you do have any past learners that you've got in mind that you think, actually, I've always thought they'd be really suitable for a role with SSG,